Camera flashes burst through the evening air as Michael Thompson adjusts his second-hand tuxedo, the fabric worn thin at the elbows. Whispers ripple through the crowd gathered outside Preston Academy's grand entrance. His grip tightens around his grandmother's wrinkled hand, her silver hair perfectly styled, her vintage blue dress making her eyes sparkle despite the nervous tremor in her smile. At 78, Grace Thompson stands tall beside her grandson, her chin lifted with quiet dignity against the countless phone cameras pointed their way. The low purr of an approaching engine cuts through the murmurs. A sleek black Rolls-Royce glides to a stop before them, its polished surface reflecting the spring sunset. The driver's window rolls down with mechanical precision, revealing a familiar face that sends the crowd into stunned silence. Behind the wheel, Keanu Reeves grins warmly at the unlikely pair. Before anyone can process this surreal moment, his voice carries across the courtyard. "Your chariot awaits." The scene freezes on Michael's astonished expression, his grandmother's delighted gasp, and the growing realization that this prom night will become legendary. The fluorescent lights of Preston Academy's hallways cast harsh shadows across Michael Thompson's face as he hurried between classes, clutching his worn backpack close. His scholarship to this prestigious private school meant everything. It was his ticket to a better future, a chance to make his grandmother proud. But being the scholarship kid came with its own price tag, one paid in sidelong glances and whispered comments about his thrift store clothes and packed lunches. Every afternoon, Michael rushed from his last class to catch the bus to downtown, where he worked the evening shift at Joe's Diner. The smell of grease and coffee had become as familiar as his grandmother's perfume, both scents carrying the weight of sacrifice and love. His hands had grown calloused from carrying plates and wiping tables, each dollar earned carefully saved for college applications and basic necessities. Home was a small two-bedroom apartment on the east side of town, where his grandmother Grace had raised him since he was 5. The walls held faded photographs of his parents, memories frozen before the car accident that left him in Grace's care. She had postponed her retirement, taking on extra alterations work from her sewing business to ensure Michael could have everything he needed. Her arthritis-curved fingers still moved with precision across fabric, just as they still managed to ruffle his hair every morning before school. Preston Academy existed in a different universe from their modest apartment. The parking lot gleamed with luxury cars driven by students whose biggest worry was which Ivy League college would accept them first. Michael navigated this world carefully, excelling in his classes while trying to remain invisible to the social hierarchy that ruled the school's hallways. Brandon Fleming and his crew of self-appointed elite students made sure to remind Michael daily of his place in their world, at the bottom. Grace noticed everything, though she never mentioned the days Michael came home with shoulders slumped lower than usual. Instead, she filled their evenings with stories of her own youth, of dreams deferred and choices made. She told him about the prom she never attended because her family couldn't afford a dress, about the boy who asked her anyway, and how she sometimes wondered about that missed dance. Her eyes would grow distant then, seeing something beyond their small living room. The upcoming senior prom loomed over Preston Academy like a glittering storm cloud. Proposals grew more elaborate each day, with students trying to outdo each other in grandeur and expense. Michael had saved enough from his diner job to afford a decent suit rental and tickets, planning to ask Sarah from his chemistry class. She was kind, smart, and one of the few students who treated him like a person rather than a charity case. But life at Preston Academy had taught Michael that kindness often crumbled under peer pressure. He watched as Sarah's friends surrounded her at lunch, their voices carrying across the cafeteria about the importance of finding the right date, someone who could provide the full luxury prom experience, limo rides, expensive restaurants, designer outfits. Sarah's apologetic glances in his direction told him everything he needed to know. Grace watched him push his dinner around his plate that evening, her wise eyes taking in the slump of his shoulders and the forced smile that didn't reach his eyes. She pulled out her old photo album, the one with corners worn smooth from years of handling. Together, they sat on their weathered couch, looking through memories of a different time. Her fingers traced over images of her own high school days, pausing on a page where a young Grace stood in a homemade dress, dreams of dancing still bright in her eyes. Neither of them knew then that this quiet evening would spark an idea that would change not just their lives, but would ripple through Preston Academy and beyond, touching hearts across the country. Sometimes the biggest moments start small, with a shared look, a remembered dream, and the courage to do something unexpected. Michael spent Saturday morning helping Grace organize her sewing supplies, the familiar routine of sorting buttons and threading needles calming his nerves after another tough week at school. Sarah had officially told him yesterday that she couldn't go to prom with him. Her words still echoed in his mind, She'd accepted an invitation from Brandon Fleming, explaining that it was just better for everyone this way. The afternoon sun streamed through their apartment windows as Grace pulled out an old cedar chest from her closet. The hinges creaked as she opened it, revealing carefully preserved treasures from her youth. Michael paused his button sorting, drawn by his grandmother's soft gasp as she lifted out a piece of pale blue fabric. Grace smoothed her hands over the material, lost in memory. It was her would-be prom dress, never finished, never worn. She designed it herself, planning every detail until her father lost his job and prom became an impossible luxury. The fabric had waited 60 years in this chest, along with the dreams of a 17-year-old girl who just wanted one magical night. Michael watched his grandmother's face, seeing past the wrinkles to the young woman in the photographs. He thought about all the time she'd put her own dreams aside, first for her family, then for him. Every extra sewing job she took, every night she spent helping with his homework, every sacrifice she made without complaint. His mind drifted to the prom tickets in his desk drawer, bought with tips from the diner, now seemingly useless. The idea struck him suddenly, crazy and perfect all at once. His heart raced as he looked at Grace, still lost in her memories. He cleared his throat, his voice coming out surprisingly steady as he spoke the words that would change everything. He asked his grandmother to be his prom date. Grace's head snapped up, her eyes wide with surprise. For a moment, she thought he was joking, but the earnest expression on his face made her pause. Michael explained his plan. They could finish her dress together, he'd wear his rented tux, and they'd finally have the prom night she'd missed all those years ago. Tears welled in Grace's eyes as she looked at her grandson, this remarkable young man she'd raised. She started to protest. He should go with someone his own age, she was too old, people would talk. But Michael's determination grew stronger with each objection. He reminded her of all the stories she'd told him about standing up for what's right, about being true to yourself no matter what others think. The decision crystallized between them in that sunlit room, surrounded by threads and memories. Grace reached for her sewing scissors, her hand steady despite her emotions. She would need to adjust the pattern for her current measurements, and Michael would need to learn basic stitching to help. They had 2 weeks to prepare, 2 weeks to turn 60-year-old dreams into reality. That evening, as they sat planning their preparations over dinner, Michael noticed something different about his grandmother. She sat straighter, her eyes sparkled with excitement as she sketched dress modifications on a napkin. He realized that sometimes the bravest decisions aren't the ones that change the world, but the ones that right an old wrong, that honor the people who shaped us. Neither of them discussed the reactions they'd face at Preston Academy. Grace didn't mention her worries about embarrassing her grandson, and Michael kept quiet about the certain ridicule headed his way. Instead, they talked about dance steps Grace could teach him, about the songs they both loved, about the perfect shade of blue for a corsage. In that moment, they chose joy over fear, love over appearances, and began a journey that would prove far more extraordinary than either could imagine. Monday morning arrived with the subtlety of a thunderclap. Michael hadn't told anyone about his prom plans, but secrets at Preston Academy had a way of spreading like wildfire. Someone had overheard him making arrangements with the ticket office to change his date's name. By first period, whispers followed him through the hallways. By lunch, those whispers had evolved into open stares and barely concealed snickers. Brandon Fleming cornered him at his locker between classes, his designer shoes squeaking on the polished floor. The usual group of followers flanked him, phones ready to capture whatever happened next. Brandon's mock sympathy dripped with venom as he asked if Michael was really so desperate that he had to take his grandmother to prom. The crowd around them grew, feeding on the anticipation of Michael's humiliation. But something had changed in Michael. The memory of Grace's joy as they worked on her dress the night before created a shield around his heart. He met Brandon's gaze steadily, refusing to drop his eyes or hunch his shoulders. His response was quiet but clear. He told Brandon that some people understood the meaning of respect and love. The unexpected dignity in his voice caused a ripple of uncertainty through the watching crowd. The relative peace lasted until someone created a social media post. A crude photoshopped image appeared on Instagram showing Michael and an elderly woman in outdated clothes, surrounded by laughing emojis. The caption read, "Preston's latest power couple, when you can't get a real date." Within hours, the post had hundreds of likes and shares, spawning countless mocking comments and cruel memes. At the diner that evening, Michael's hands shook as he served plates of meatloaf and apple pie. His phone buzzed constantly with notifications, each one a fresh reminder of the storm brewing at school. Regular customers noticed his distraction. The way his usually warm smile seemed strained. Mrs. Henderson, a retired teacher who came in every Monday for the Blue Plate special, caught his arm gently and told him to keep his chin up. Sometimes the hardest choices were the most worthwhile. The real gut punch came when Michael arrived home to find Grace on the phone with her friend Betty. The strain in her voice made him pause in the doorway. She was trying to cancel her standing hair appointment for prom night, making excuses about not feeling well. Her friend had seen the social media posts, had called to warn her about the ridicule her grandson was facing. Grace hung up the phone and turned to find Michael watching her. The pain in her eyes cut deeper than any taunt or meme. She started to say they should forget the whole thing, that she couldn't bear to see him suffer for trying to make an old woman's dream come true. Her hands trembled as she reached for the dress they'd been working on, intending to pack it away with her other unfinished dreams. Michael crossed the room in 3 strides, gently taking the dress from her hands. His voice cracked as he reminded her of the story she'd told him about his grandfather, how he'd stood up to his whole family to marry her despite their disapproval of her poor background. Some things, he said, were worth fighting for. Some people were worth any amount of ridicule. That night, they worked on the dress together in comfortable silence, each stitch a quiet act of defiance against the judgment of others. Grace taught Michael how to hem properly, her arthritic fingers guiding his uncertain ones with practiced patience. Neither mentioned the continuing buzz of his phone or the worried glances she cast his way when she thought he wasn't looking. As Michael lay in bed that night, another wave of notifications lighting up his phone screen, he realized that standing up to cruelty was like learning to sew. It took patience, steady hands, and the courage to keep going even when you pricked your fingers. What he didn't know was that his quiet determination had already set larger wheels in motion, and the next day would bring unexpected allies into their corner. The story shifted on a Tuesday afternoon when Katie, president of Preston Academy's newspaper club, approached Michael during his lunch break. She'd watched the social media frenzy with growing disgust, recognizing the deeper story beneath the cruel memes. Her article, titled Honor, Love, and Second Chances, the real story behind Preston's most talked about prom date, went live on the school's news website that evening. Katie's piece captured everything. Grace's 60-year-old dream, her decades of sacrifice raising Michael after his parents' death, and Michael's quiet determination to give his grandmother the night she never had. The article included a photo of Grace in her half-finished blue dress, her face glowing with joy as she showed Michael how to properly pin a seam. The image spoke volumes about love, family, and the courage to stand against the tide of public opinion. Local news stations picked up the story within hours. Channel 5's evening broadcast led with the headline, Preston Academy student honors grandmother with unique prom invitation. Social media platforms erupted with a new wave of posts, but this time the tone had shifted dramatically. The original mocking memes were drowned out by an outpouring of support from across the country. A video of Michael at work in the diner went viral. Someone had captured him explaining to a curious customer why he was learning to sew. His genuine smile and proud description of his grandmother's original dress design touched hearts worldwide. Comments flooded in with stories of people's own grandparents, of missed opportunities, and second chances. Grace's phone started ringing non-stop. Old friends called to congratulate her, local dress shops offered to help with alterations, and morning shows wanted interviews. She handled the attention with characteristic grace, politely declining most requests but accepting a few that she thought might help others understand the importance of family bonds and standing up for what's right. The turning point came when Preston Academy's most unexpected ally stepped forward. Sarah Martinez, head cheerleader and Brandon Fleming's cousin, posted a video defending Michael and Grace. She revealed how her own grandmother had raised her after her mother's illness, and how she regretted letting peer pressure stop her from standing up sooner. The video concluded with Sarah asking her own grandmother to be her prom +1, starting a trend that would soon sweep through senior classes across the country. Brandon Fleming's social circle crumbled as more students found the courage to break ranks. His attempts to mock Michael now met with cold stares and turned backs. The tide of public opinion had turned so completely that even his most loyal followers began distancing themselves from his cruelty. But the biggest surprise came through Katie's article. Her piece had caught the attention of a Hollywood producer who happened to be close friends with Keanu Reeves. The actor, known for his random acts of kindness, read the story during a break on his latest film set. Something about Michael and Grace's courage, their willingness to face ridicule to honor their bond, spoke to him deeply. A private message arrived in Michael's school email late Thursday night. The sender's name made him blink twice to ensure he wasn't dreaming. He rushed to show Grace, who had fallen asleep in her sewing chair, the blue dress nearly complete in her lap. As she read the message, her hands trembled with emotion. Keanu Reeves wasn't just offering support. He wanted to be part of their story in a way that would transform their prom night from a moment of triumph over bullying into something truly legendary. Michael sat at their small kitchen table, staring at his phone in disbelief as Keanu Reeves' voice filled their apartment through the speaker. Grace perched on the edge of her chair, her reading glasses sliding down her nose as she leaned forward to catch every word. The actor's warm, genuine tone put them instantly at ease as he shared how their story had touched him. Keanu spoke about his own relationship with his grandmother, about the moments we miss and can never get back. He understood something deeper in Michael and Grace's choice: the courage to seize a moment of joy despite what others might think. His offer came naturally in the conversation. He wanted to be their chauffeur for prom night. Not as a publicity stunt, but as someone who recognized the beauty in their story and wanted to be part of it. Grace's hands flew to her mouth, tears gathering in her eyes. Michael struggled to find words, his usual composure cracking with emotion. Keanu's gentle laugh came through the speaker, telling them to take their time. He knew it was a lot to process. He shared his personal number, telling them to text him any questions or concerns. Before ending the call, he asked Grace about her dress, showing genuine interest in the 60-year journey of her prom dream. The next morning brought another surprise. A sleek black car pulled up outside their apartment building. The driver delivered a package from Keanu. Inside was a vintage sewing machine, the exact model Grace had admired in magazines during her youth but could never afford. A handwritten note explained that every fairy tale deserved the right tools to make magic happen. Grace ran her fingers over the machine's smooth surface, remembering hours spent at her neighbor's house, borrowing their machine to sew Michael's school clothes. This gift wasn't about celebrity extravagance. It was about honoring the craft she'd used all her life to show love. She immediately set it up, the gentle whir of the machine becoming the soundtrack to their final week of preparations. News of Keanu's involvement stayed between them, a precious secret that made their eyes sparkle with suppressed joy. At school, Michael walked taller, no longer bothered by lingering whispers. His quiet confidence affected others. Students who had previously ignored him now stopped to chat, curious about the change in him. Even Brandon Fleming's attempts at mockery fell flat, met with Michael's serene smile and unwavering focus on the future. Grace experienced her own transformation. Her neighbors noticed she hummed while collecting her mail, her steps lighter despite her arthritis. During their evening dance practices in the living room, she shared stories of her youth with new energy, as if the approaching prom night was healing old wounds she'd carried silently for decades. The day before prom, Keanu surprised them with a visit to their apartment. He arrived without fanfare, dressed casually and carrying takeout from a local diner. Over containers of chicken parmesan, they planned the next evening's timeline. Grace insisted on making coffee in her best cups, her hands trembling slightly with excitement as she served Hollywood royalty at her worn kitchen table. Keanu's genuine interest in their lives touched them deeply. He asked Grace about her sewing techniques, listening intently as she explained the intricate details of her dress design. He and Michael connected over their shared love of motorcycles and classic films. The hours flew by, celebrity status forgotten in the warmth of real conversation. As the evening wound down, Keanu noticed the wall of family photos, pausing at an image of Michael's parents. Grace's voice softened as she shared their story, the accident that had changed everything, and the strength she'd found in raising Michael. Keanu's response was quiet but heartfelt. He told them that family wasn't always about blood, but about the people who choose to stand by us, who help us become our best selves. Before leaving, Keanu asked to see the finished dress. Grace proudly displayed her creation, now complete after 60 years of waiting. The pale blue fabric shimmed in the apartment's light, every stitch representing a moment of love between grandmother and grandson. Keanu's genuine amazement at her craftsmanship brought fresh tears to Grace's eyes. That night, neither Michael nor Grace could sleep. They sat in their living room, drinking tea and talking softly about the journey that had brought them here. From a moment of shared vulnerability over an old photo album to tomorrow's grand adventure, they had transformed from victims of ridicule into symbols of courage and love. But more importantly, they had transformed internally, stronger, more confident, and more certain than ever that choosing love over fear was always the right decision. The setting sun painted Preston Academy's facade in shades of gold as students began arriving for prom. Stretched limousines and luxury cars formed a glittering parade, depositing couples dressed in their finest. The air buzzed with excitement, camera flashes, and the pulse of music from within the transformed gymnasium. Inside their apartment, Michael adjusted his bow tie one final time, his hands steadier than he'd expected. The tuxedo rental shop had surprised him by upgrading his outfit at no extra charge, the owner touched by their story. In her bedroom, Grace put the finishing touches on her makeup, her hands remembering the motions from decades past. The blue dress fit perfectly, every stitch holding memories of their weeks working together. A text from Keanu announced his arrival. Michael helped Grace down the apartment stairs, her blue dress floating around her like a dream made real. Their neighbors had gathered in the hallway, creating an impromptu honor guard. Mrs. Rodriguez from 3B wiped tears from her eyes, remembering her own grandmother as she watched them pass. The black Rolls-Royce waited at the curb, Keanu standing beside it in a perfectly tailored chauffeur's uniform. His genuine smile and warm hug for Grace set the tone for the evening. This wasn't about celebrity or spectacle, but about honoring something pure and true. As he helped Grace into the car, she squeezed his hand in silent gratitude. The drive to Preston Academy felt surreal. Grace pointed out landmarks from her youth, sharing stories of the neighborhood's changes. Keanu listened intently, adding his own observations about how communities evolve but genuine connections remain timeless. Michael watched his grandmother come alive with joy, decades melting away from her face as they approached their destination. News of their expected arrival had spread. A crowd gathered at the school entrance, phones raised to capture the moment. But when the Rolls-Royce pulled up, something unexpected happened. Instead of mockery or sensation-seeking, a respectful hush fell over the assembled students. Brandon Fleming stood among them, his usual smirk replaced by an expression of genuine awe. Keanu emerged first, opening the door with flourish. Michael stepped out, extending his hand to help Grace. As she rose from the car, radiant in her self-made dress, spontaneous applause erupted from the crowd. Katie's article had helped people see the beauty in their story, but witnessing it in person touched hearts in a way words never could. Sarah Martinez broke from the crowd, her own grandmother beside her in an elegant evening gown. Others followed, students who had found the courage to bring elderly relatives, to honor their own family bonds. What had started as one grandson's act of love had sparked a movement, transforming Preston Academy's prom into a multi-generational celebration of family and respect. Inside the gymnasium, the DJ spotted Grace and Michael's entrance. The music shifted to a classic from the 1960s, one of the songs Grace had taught Michael during their living room dance practices. Without hesitation, they took to the dance floor. Grace's decades-old dreams of a prom dance came true as she and Michael swayed to the music, their joy infectious. Keanu surprised everyone by asking Grace for the next dance, while Michael partnered with Sarah's grandmother. Soon the dance floor filled with mixed pairs, teenagers and elderly guests moving to a blend of classic and contemporary songs. The usual social barriers of high school dissolved in the face of genuine human connection. Brandon Fleming approached them during a break, his usual confidence replaced by humility. He apologized to both Michael and Grace, admitting that their courage had made him question his own behavior. Grace's response was characteristic of her grace. She simply offered him her hand for the next dance, showing that redemption was always possible. The night's most touching moment came when the time arrived to announce prom royalty. The senior class had held a secret re-vote. Principal Anderson's voice cracked with emotion as he announced that, by unanimous decision, Grace had been named honorary prom queen. The crown was placed on her silver hair as tears of joy rolled down her cheeks. Michael watched his grandmother accept her crown, remembering the scared young girl from her stories who couldn't afford a prom dress. Now she stood radiant, surrounded by applauding students, her 60-year dream transformed into something far more meaningful than she could have imagined. Keanu stood at the back of the room, his own eyes suspiciously bright as he witnessed the magic he'd helped create. As the evening drew to a close, Grace didn't look tired despite hours of dancing. She glowed with an inner light, strengthened by the love and acceptance that filled the room. Students and their elderly guests exchanged phone numbers, making plans for future gatherings. What had begun as potential humiliation had bloomed into a celebration of intergenerational connection and understanding. In the quiet moment before their final dance, Grace hugged Michael tight, whispering that his parents would have been so proud of the man he'd become. Around them, Preston Academy's prom had become more than a high school dance. It was a testament to the power of courage, love, and the choice to transform cruelty into kindness. The Monday after prom, Preston Academy felt different. The usual social barriers had crumbled, replaced by a new sense of community. Students who had never spoken before shared lunch tables, showing each other prom photos and swapping stories about their elderly guests. The cafeteria buzzed with plans for a new club dedicated to bridging generational gaps through storytelling and shared experiences. Michael's story had gone truly viral over the weekend. Major news networks picked up the footage of Grace's crowning moment, her joyful tears touching millions of hearts worldwide. Social media platforms flooded with similar stories. Grandparents sharing their own missed opportunities, grandchildren pledging to create new memories with their elders. The hashtag #DanceWithGrace trended globally, inspiring schools across the country to rethink their prom traditions. Grace's sewing business transformed overnight. Orders poured in from people wanting dresses that carried the same magic as her prom gown. She hired 3 assistants from the local senior center, creating a workshop where skills and stories were shared across generations. The vintage sewing machine from Keanu held pride of place. Its gentle were a reminder that dreams never truly expire. Brandon Fleming surprised everyone by becoming one of the most active supporters of Preston Academy's new initiatives. His experience at prom had sparked genuine change in him. He organized regular events where students could learn life skills from local seniors, everything from cooking to basic car maintenance. His own grandmother became a regular fixture at these gatherings, her pride in his transformation evident in her bright smile. Keanu Reeves kept in touch, but not in the way celebrities typically do. He sent Grace handwritten letters, sharing stories about his own family and asking her advice about life's important moments. He became an unexpected advocate for intergenerational connection, using his platform to highlight similar stories of family bonds and courage. During interviews about his latest films, he often mentioned the night he served as chauffeur, describing it as one of his most meaningful experiences. The prom photos of Michael and Grace hung in Preston Academy's main hallway, alongside other moments from that transformative night. But perhaps more importantly, they hung in their apartment, next to the old photos of Michael's parents. The images told a story of love transcending generations, of the courage to stand up for what matters most. Sarah Martinez and Katie collaborated on a documentary about the experience, interviewing students and their elderly guests about the impact of that night. The film won several student awards and was screened at community centers nationwide, sparking conversations about ageism and the importance of family bonds. Michael's final weeks at Preston Academy passed in a blur of positive change. His scholarship applications, which now included essays about his prom experience, attracted attention from top universities. Admission officers recognized the leadership and courage it took to transform potential humiliation into a movement for positive change. He received a full scholarship to his dream school, where he planned to study intergenerational psychology and social work. Grace's blue dress found a permanent home in a display case at the local museum, part of an exhibit about community transformation and social change. But more meaningful than any public recognition were the quiet evening moments she and Michael still shared. They continued their dance practices in the living room, no longer preparing for prom but simply enjoying their time together, stronger for having faced judgment and emerged victorious. 1 year after that magical prom night, Michael stood at a podium addressing his graduating class. He spoke about courage, not the kind that makes headlines, but the quiet bravery of being true to yourself and honoring those you love. In the audience, Grace sat beside Keanu Reeves, who had flown in specially for the ceremony. As Michael described how one decision to honor his grandmother had sparked a nationwide movement, Grace's eyes shone with pride and joy. Their story became more than just a viral moment or a feel-good news piece. It became a reminder that sometimes the most powerful changes start with a simple choice. The choice to honor love over fear, to choose kindness over cruelty, and to believe that it's never too late for dreams to come true. In schools across the country, new traditions bloomed, bridging generations and proving that when we open our hearts to understanding, extraordinary transformations become possible.